All right, so looking at a kind of a topical study today in the Book of Judges, because the last time we were in Judges, we were looking at primarily Gideon and just the different aspects of his life, and then also looking at some of the lesser known judges like Tola and Elon and people like that. But as I do, or as we tend to do sometimes, when we're reading through the Bible, we do find then that there's a repetition of a phrase or something that tends to pop up a little bit. So that caught my attention, and I decided to look at that a bit and look at where there was a particular phrase, and the phrase was this: "The Spirit of the Lord." And so I wanted to see, where this phrase is mentioned in the Book of Judges, and who it ends up being applied to, and what sort of progression that there is with that particular phrase. Now, it's interesting that we do see the Spirit of God mentioned in the Old Testament really from the outset of the Bible. Even in Genesis chapter 1, it talks about how the Spirit of God, hovered over the deep and all these kinds of things. So the Spirit of God is a very prominent feature in the scriptures. And of course, we know that the Spirit of God, or the Spirit of the Lord, is that third member of the Trinity, not a lesser member. I think sometimes we tend to look at the Spirit of God and kind of go, well, we have God the Father way up here, and then we have God the Son, and then God the Spirit is sort of down the pecking order a bit. But that's not really the case. When the scriptures teach about the triune God, all the members of the Trinity all have equal prominence and equal importance, as it were. And the Trinity is something that man cannot understand. Patrick tried to explain it by using a three-leaf clover, by saying, well, there's one leaf here, leaf here, leaf here. They're the same type of leaf, but they're separate. And it's kind of like, well, me, kind of, sort of, not entirely. And other people have tried to explain the Trinity looking at, the three states of matter, solid, liquid, and gas, or using these kind of natural ideas about trying to describe the threesome of God, and they all fall short because God is beyond all that, but the fact is, it is there, it does exist. But in order for us to understand an eternal idea, we would have to be we would have to be God, to understand that. But yet the Bible does teach that. And really, when it talks about God the Father, the role of God the Father is to choose people and to exercise that sovereign choice. We'll be talking a lot about that on Sunday. So if you wanted to come to church and listen to that, and then God the Son is the one who redeems us to have relationship with God the Father, and the Spirit of God is that one who teaches us as believers here in the earth about the things that Christ has said, and reminds us of the things that Christ has said. And because the Spirit of God is very much the breath of God, he is the author of the Word of God. And so anytime we hear the Word of God and we then understand it, it's because the Spirit of God, who's been placed in us because we put faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as a seal, then makes it make sense. So, so often if you've talked to an unsaved individual, they would say, I don't understand. I don't get this. I don't understand what you're talking about. And yet we do, but that's because the Spirit of God resides in us and helps us to get it. And also the Spirit of God, as it says in Romans 8, it says we don't know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. So the Spirit of God actually solves the communication problem. I mean, all of us have had the experience of praying and thinking that we're praying to the ceiling. That we're, things are, just we stumble, we lack for words, and sometimes when we hear pastors or people that we may regard as quote elite Christians or something like that praying from the platform, and they can pontificate and say all kinds of great and wonderful things. Well, no, that's not impressive to God, really. So because actually what is more impressive to God is where your heart is, and God is able then to take that groaning that is within you and that struggle, that trouble, and translate it, as it were, into God's presence and make it a wonderful thing. So anyway, but the phrase "the Spirit of the Lord" actually is the first time that this phrase is mentioned is in the book of Judges. So again, talks about the Spirit of God in the other books, prior to the book of Judges. But the first time you hear about the Spirit of the Lord, which is God's personal name, okay, it is in the book of Judges. So it's kind of interesting. So, but what we'll do is we'll look at the first appearance of this, which is Judges chapter 3 and verses 7 through 11, which is about Othniel. He's the first judge that is mentioned in the book of Judges, and says, "So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan Rishathaim 8 years. When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel, who delivered them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel, and he went out to war, and the Lord delivered Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed over that king, so that the land had rest for 40 years, and then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. Now, that's a relatively short biography about this man Othniel, but he is a very significant judge in the sense that the other judges that we looked at last time that were not a lot mentioned about them, maybe a couple of verses and that kind of thing. There's nothing desperately spiritual about those particular judges. It says they judged, Israel for 22 years or 23 years or whatever the case was. But here it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon Othniel. So now let me just highlight a few things on the screen here. Okay, so just highlighted some things in color. So you can see in yellow there where the Spirit of the Lord is. I'm going to be consistent with that and have it underlined in yellow. Now, Othniel's name, just as a side, means the force or lion of God. What a great name. That's a wonderful name to be given. So his uncle was Caleb, and now Caleb was one of the men that was able to then come into the promised land because he believed God. He was one of the spies. So this man, Kenaz. Now, I would say Kenaz was not probably not allowed to come in because he was, Caleb and Joshua were the only people of that generation that came in, but yet Othniel was one of those men that was able to come in. So I would say Othniel was probably, an older man at this particular stage, because we would have had the conquering of Joshua and all that generation, which lasted a good number of decades. And then when the children of Israel, did what they did there, as it says in verse 7, so the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is after Joshua died, and the children of Israel then kind of scuppered away from the things of God. So but anyway, so as I do, I look at the action words, okay? And so and what's interesting about when we look at the Spirit of the Lord in this book is the Spirit of the Lord came upon. And that seems to be the stock set of words that is associated with all of the happenings of the Spirit of God within the book. But there's 3 different types of words that are used, but they're all translated came upon. So now these words came upon all have various nuances, all have various sorts of weight that is ascribed to them. And it's interesting how there is a progression of where this goes. So we have the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. He, as a result of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, he then judges Israel. He goes out to war. And because the Spirit of God is upon him, the Lord delivers this king of Mesopotamia into his hand. And then it says his hand prevailed. So in blue there, that's what the Spirit of God is doing. And then what is in green is what Othniel is doing. Okay, so because it's important to, when you're looking at a passage of scripture, to look at the players, look at the actors, look at the characters that are there, because what we have here in terms of individuals is we have Othniel and we have God. Okay, those are the 2 individuals. The groups that are involved is the children of Israel, and I would say that the king that is mentioned of Mesopotamia, he represents an enemy. He represents a group of people. So he's not, I wouldn't see him necessarily as an individual. Okay. So the 2 individuals here that are in this passage is Othniel and the Lord. Okay. So this is this interaction that goes on here. So the Spirit of the Lord is coming upon him. And as a result of this, he judges, he goes out. Now, the word that is translated came upon there is a pretty light duty word, actually. It has the idea that the Spirit of God, I'm trying not to use the word came, but it kind of showed up, okay, and descended into the situation. So when it says come upon him, I think that's actually a fairly good translation, which means that, the Spirit of God came, as it were, sort of to stand alongside of him, to be with him. So it's really having the presence of God there. So now as we work through this, the Spirit of God is then going to be a lot more active, and a lot more stronger language that is used. So, but really, that's a good first place to start. Is if you're going to deal with the enemies of your life, and you're going to go out and do these things and prevail. Well, God has to be there. So God has to be there by His Spirit alongside of you and helping you in that sense. So that's that particular phrase used in regard to Othniel. Now let's look at another judge here, and this is one that we know well because we've been looking at him for a couple of weeks. and that is Gideon. And we did look at this passage briefly, but again, we're going to look at the wording that is there. So this is what it says. Then all the Midianites and the Amalekites, people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. Now it's after this is the fleece situation, and the dew upon the fleece and not on the ground, and then on the ground, not the fleece, and all that stuff. So, so just to highlight the phrases again and what happens is it says in verse 34, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon. So here we have this word came upon again, same English translation, but here's a very, very different word, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But as a result of the Spirit of God coming upon Gideon, then Gideon does things. He blows the trumpet. He sent messengers on 2 different occasions to gather different people around him. Now, the word that is translated, or the phrase there, came upon, this is a very, very different term here. Because the first term in regard to Othniel was the idea of, the Spirit comes, stands alongside of you, is there. The presence of God is there. This word here means that the Spirit of God has come around him and encased him like a garment, like a coat. And in fact, the idea of this word is not only is the Spirit of God around him, containing him, but it is lavished on him. So it's not just a coat that we sort of stick on, every day for everyday wear. This was the kind of thing that was of extraordinary purpose. And it was lovely. It was beautiful. It was something that was around him that brought glory unto God. And as a result of that, he blows the trumpet. He says, he's very, very empowered. He's very, very invigorated by the presence of God now around him. And so then he sends messengers and does all these different things. So to get people to come around him. So now we know from after that, he was able to gather, a whole bunch of people around him, 32,000 men, but then God says, no, that's too many. Whoever's afraid, go home. Well, 22,000 went home, and he was left with 10,000. And I'm sure, Gideon was, kind of going, whew, well, I'm glad it wasn't everybody. Well, God was going, no, that's still too many. So then we go through this test of how they drink out of the water and all that kind of stuff. And then they're left with 300, so really it boiled down to, the reliance on God. But you see, in order for Gideon to even accept that was the case, he had to be completely encased and surrounded by the Spirit of God. So let's summarize a little bit here. So in regard to Othniel, the Spirit of God came upon, which is to it literally means to exist from above, or in addition to. So you can understand that it's like God comes from above and comes and presents himself there and is then alongside of you, being in addition to you. As a result, Othniel makes judgment in regard to the people, because it says that he judged Israel. And the word judge there, it not only includes the idea of giving some sort of judicial help, to the people in terms of helping them to assess and helping them to come to conclusions about matters, but it's also about leadership. Othniel went out and as a result of this and did things. The Spirit then delivered him, or delivered the king into his hand, and then Othniel prevailed. So, but then when it came to Gideon, the Spirit came upon, which means he was clothed, he was lavished upon in regard to the Spirit. And Gideon then blew the trumpet, and when you blow a trumpet, you're drawing attention to yourself. Okay. And then Gideon sent messengers to go and gather people. So the Spirit of God, when the Spirit of God is upon you, causes you then to do certain things. So now, and then as a result of that, the people then gathered and came. Okay, so it's not just about what happens with individuals here. There is this aspect of that the people that were sent for, then they came. Okay, to do a spiritual work. Okay, now let's look at the next judge briefly here and see what happens with him. So this is Judges chapter 11 and verses 29 through 33. And this is what it says. Okay, it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh and passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah to Gilead, he advanced toward the people of Ammon. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the people of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. So Jephthah advanced toward the people of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands, and he defeated them from Arar as far as Minnith, 20 cities, and to Abel Karamim with a very great slaughter, and thus the people of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. Now let's highlight what's going on here. Okay, so in verse 29 it says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon. Okay, now that word came upon actually is going back to Othniel. So it's this idea that God kind of descended from above and got alongside. Now, incidentally, Jephthah's name, as I have it there, kind of bolded, just simply means he opens. So there's not really a spiritual name that's involved there. Jephthah was an interesting sort of character, but as a result of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, he moves. Okay, it says pass through. Now, where it says advance there in green, that actually means pass through too. So it's the same word. So in fact, when you look at the Authorized Bible, it just says pass through. So it's just the same word. But it's this idea that the Spirit of God causes movement. If you're going to have the Spirit of God alongside of you and descends to you, it's not just to have a cup of tea. Okay, we're not talking about just sitting around doing nothing. The Spirit of God motivates, and so he goes through these various areas. He goes from Gilead and Manasseh, Mizpah to Gilead, and advanced the people of Ammon, and Ammon was the enemy. Now, Jephthah makes a vow. Now, he makes a rather rash vow because basically he says, right, okay, if God's going to do this, then whatever comes out of my front door as soon as I arrive back home after all this stuff is going to be sacrificed. So who shows up at his door at the end of all this? His daughter. And then there's all this very, very strange story about how the daughter is a virgin. She goes with her friends to basically cry over this, and we're not really terribly sure as to whether she got sacrificed or not. The language really isn't sort of abundantly clear about that, but this is the vow that Jephthah makes in regard to whatever comes out his front door. So I think it's good to make promises to God, but I think you have to think very, very carefully about what you're going to promise to God. So because obviously what the Spirit of the Lord is doing in this passage is it's causing him to pass through, to move, to go to these different areas, and to start dealing with the enemy. So there in verse 32, it says, so Jephthah advanced toward the people of Ammon. Again, this is the same idea of passing through. So it's pushing on, and and as a result of then the Lord delivering it into his hands, he defeated them. Okay, those particular people, and it gives a bit of detail as to what that's about. But when the Spirit of God is upon you and has come and presenced yourself, you do want to give to him everything that you have. You do have to be careful, about what you're saying here. I think his statement in terms of what he is promising is rash, because it just turns into a bit of a dog's dinner at the end of the story. But at the same time, I think when there is a motivation of God within us, it will then cause us to say, Lord, everything about me and everything that I have is yours. So in that way, it is sacrificed to him. But again, how this kind of pans out seems to go down a not a great road. But the phrase there came upon, again, is the same sort of word that is used in regard to Othniel. So in fact, the only time that we see the Spirit of the Lord coming upon Gideon there, where it says that he's clothed and lavished upon in terms of the Spirit, that word is only used with him. Okay. Now, the next time the Spirit of the Lord is in place here is in regard to Samson. And that is where that sort of ends. But it's used an awful lot. So out of the 13 judges that are mentioned in the book of Judges, there is Othniel, Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson. Four men are mentioned as having the Spirit of God come upon them in some shape or another. So now it's not to say that the other people and lady Deborah were not spiritual people, but it is interesting that the phraseology that is used about them, those particular people, does not include the presence of the Spirit of God. Now, another thing you have to realize about the Old Testament in terms of when the Spirit of the Lord came upon people is he came upon people in a temporary fashion. The Spirit of God did not stay with them. The Spirit of God came, exercised them to do a certain work, and then pulled off. Whereas in the New Testament, when we put faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, the Spirit of God comes upon us. We are then we're baptized in the Spirit at salvation, which is not a as some Pentecostal people would talk about. They would say that is a separate event to salvation. I don't believe it is. I believe that salvation, at the point of salvation, you are then sealed with the Spirit of God. Okay, and that is being baptized with the Spirit. So now, as we go through life, then the Spirit of God, as we're filled with the Spirit, we then start to exercise our gifts more and more. But when the Spirit of God comes upon you, in the New Testament sense, the Spirit of God stays. Now, we can grieve the Spirit of God, we can quench the Spirit of God, and we then would see a lack of activity in terms of the Spirit of God in our lives, but that's because of our own disobedience and our own apathy and that kind of thing. I'm sure all of us have had the experience of going through our Christian life going, not much going on here today, or not much going on currently. It's just you feel a bit kind of spiritually dry and you feel a bit spiritually apathetic. Does that mean the Spirit of God has absconded and left you? No. It's just that you may not be filled with the Spirit at that particular stage, because the filling of the Spirit is a thing that needs to happen on an ongoing basis. So that's why the Bible says in Ephesians 5:18, do not be drunk with wine wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit. Okay. So, and as you're filled with the Spirit, then the fruit of the Spirit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, all those things then start to grow and start to flourish. So, anytime you grow a plant, if it's cold outside, the plant's not going to be growing too fast. Now, once it warms up and you have the heat there, it starts to go a bit better. So in a sense, that's what happens with the Spirit of God. When the flame of the Spirit is in our life and flourishes in that sense, then the growth of the fruit of the Spirit of God then starts to get bigger. So, but the Spirit of God in the believer never, ever leaves, because that is God's seal upon you that you're a saved individual. All right, so let's look at our buddy Samson here. So Judges 13, 24 and 25. So the woman bore a son, and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him at Dahanadan, between Zoah and Eshtaol. Now, so all the other mentionings of the Spirit of the Lord now are all going to be in regard to Samson. And this is exciting stuff here. So now, this particular word here, it's not came upon. It says began to move upon. Okay, so it's a slightly different phrase, but what it means, that particular phrase, is to stir up or agitate. It's like it's nearly like if you take a pot of water and you put it on the hob, and then you start to see the bubbles come up, and it starts to bubble more and bubble more, and as the heat there continues, it starts to get going, So and so the water is then agitated, and so that's what this word is about. It is about the, if I can use it in a positive way, it's the agitation of the Spirit. So God, by his own heat, as it were, is getting underneath of Samson and starting to stir him, starting to agitate him, start to, kind of put ants in his pants, as it were, and just kind of like, I need to be at things. I need to do stuff. God is moving in my life, and I need to be at it. So and to me, that's a really exciting thing to even pray for yourself, because if God is alongside of you, as he was with Othniel, him, and you're clothed with the Spirit of God like Gideon and lavished upon and that kind of thing, how much better it is in terms of progress, where the Spirit of God then starts to move you, starts to bubble in your system, and you go, I don't want to be sitting around. I want to do things for God. Not sure what to do for God, but I want to do something, and so this is the place that God has Samson at this particular day. Now I'd like to go and visit Samson a bit next week more, in terms of how his mom and dad brought him up as a Nazarite, and they didn't cut his hair and all this sort of stuff. So a couple interesting stories in regard to that, but we're just sticking with this particular phrase. Now, if you move on to Judges 14:6, just the next chapter, we have this: the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart, as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father and his mother what he'd done. Okay, so as the Spirit of the Lord from Judges 13 is beginning to move in his life and beginning to agitate him and bubble him up and that kind of thing, so then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And this is a great word, because this is about God actually moving and doing and progressing and developing and doing all kinds of work, So and this is where these phrases go, and because it starts off with the Spirit of the Lord, kind of just being there, and now we're at a place where things are really happening, So now, kind of a strange situation here, where this lion has come to cause a bit of bother and jip, and so the Spirit of the Lord comes mightily upon him. So he takes the lion in his bare hands, basically, and just tears the lion apart, And then it was in that lion that the bees sort of formed a big hive, and there was a lot of honey, and then there was that riddle that he was telling and all that sort of stuff. But so it gave him great power. Now, does the Spirit of God turn you into the Hulk? No, not necessarily. It's does he necessarily give you strength physically, as he did with Samson here? No, not necessarily. He can come and give you spiritual strength. He can give you mental strength to push through and deal with things in your life that you otherwise maybe can't deal with. When my father, when I got word about my dad having passed away, I was supposed to have gone to see one of the guys that I would go and see out in the community. And so I had to ring him and tell him that I was on my way, back home and that kind of thing. And it was a bit of a strange day, because I had gone out to do my normal sort of pastoral work, as I do on that particular Tuesday. Went out to see a guy, spent a couple of hours with him, and that was dead on. That was fine. And then what I did, because it was around lunchtime, is I thought I'll go up to IKEA and go and get myself an 85p hot dog. You can get yourself a cheap, probably cheap and nasty, but sure. Anyway, so now, when I drive, my phone then connects to my car, and when it's connected to the car, it doesn't always make noise, depending on what sort of notifications are coming in and that kind of thing. So while I was in the car going up to IKEA, my brother did try to ring, but I didn't know that, and he would ring on WhatsApp. Now I would get the car would normally ring with a normal phone call, but with a WhatsApp call, it didn't ring. So for whatever reason. So anyway, I was then in IKEA and I was on the kiosk and I was looking at the different sort of hot dogs and different things and just kind of browsing through things. And then my watch buzzed. Okay. So there was a message that came through and I looked at my watch and I saw that it was a message from my brother, but my little Temu special here only shows me the first line, and it doesn't show me like the whole message. So all I saw on the watch was "When you call Dad." That's all it said. And I was like, oh well, he's just calling about something about Dad. So I wasn't in a big panic. But then I got the phone out, and then so I could look at the whole message, and it says, "When you call, Dad passed away this morning." So that's how I found out about my father's passing, was through a text message. And now that wasn't the fault of my brother. My brother did try to ring me and to tell me what was going on. I then, the kiosk and the hot dog and all that kind of stuff. I just went right, and so I ran out of IKEA, went into the parking garage. If you know about IKEA, there's a big metal parking garage there, and the signal's not great in there because of all the metal. So anyway, I rang my brother and it's kind so I had to then get out and get parked somewhere else so I could hear him. So then I got speaking to him. But as I got that information, and obviously when you get information about, sometimes in your own mind, you go, right, I got myself set up for this. I'm expecting this. So, we're good to go. But, the emotion of it does start to hit you, which is understandable. Now, on the way down the road, I needed to phone this other guy and say, look, I can't meet with you because of blah, blah, blah. And so I did ring him and I kept it together with the guy. I just says, look, I just need to let you know that I just got word that my father passed away. And so I can't see you. And the guy was flabbergasted. He was like, how are you holding yourself together? I'm gobsmacked. I just can't understand how you're not going ballistic, and because I would know his form and I would know if his dad passed away, he would go blue. But I think, when God is upon you in his spirit, he does help you and he does give you fortitude in your mind to start dealing with things. Not that you go and sidestep stuff and kind of pretend. I didn't pretend anything about my father, but sometimes you can put the little stoic face on and just kind of go, right, okay, there we go. That happens. But I was allowing myself emotionally to have it hit me, because I went through the process when my mother died as a 15-year-old of basically saying, I ain't going to cry about this. And I didn't cry about it for 8 years until, later on when I was with my aunt. But I'm just telling that story because I think when God lives in you by his spirit, he does give you fortitude. He gives you strength, to do things that are perhaps then beyond yourself. So now let's look at the next couple of things here. So Judges 14:19, so just a few verses on. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ascalon and killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. This is in regard to the thing about the lion and the honey. So his anger was aroused and he went back up to his father's house. And Samson's a rather impetuous sort of man. He's an interesting sort of character. The weakness that Samson had as a judge, yeah, if you remember when we talked about the judges, the majority of the judges all had a weakness. They all had some kind of uh, either social issue or a spiritual problem or something like this. Ehud was the left-handed man. Gideon was the fellow that was the youngest in his family and that kind of stuff, and didn't really amount to much, and yet God used him. Deborah was a woman. Okay, socially and culturally, that just was not on back then, and but yet God used her mightily. And so when you get up to Samson's weakness was women. So but God used that to go against the Philistines, because it says that God was using this as an occasion against the Philistines. So, but here we have the Spirit of the Lord comes mightily upon him. Same word there, meaning to progress, to move, to push, all that kind of stuff. And as a result, he went out down to Ascalon. Ascalon is one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines. Kills 30 men, took their clothes, and he gave it to the guys who were able to explain the riddle. Again, kind of a weird story. Don't necessarily want to explore that particular thing right now, but nonetheless, the Spirit of God came upon him, and he was able to do mighty work. And then in Judges 15, 14 through 15, so that's the next chapter. This is the last time that this particular phrase is used. And it says, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. And then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the ropes that were on his arms became like flax as it burned with fire. And his bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand, took it, and killed 1,000 men with it. Okay. So, oh boy. So the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Lord, comes mightily upon him. Again, same word. So in every occasion that the Spirit of the Lord is mentioned in regard to Samson, it is all this push. It's all get going, move. So where the Spirit of the Lord started with him was like a boiling pot. So it was, get it bubbling, get it going, and when you have that in your life, when the Spirit of God is moving like that in your life, then as you pray and you ask God, show me what to do, show me how to get forward, show me where I'm supposed to go, then God starts to do that. And then there's things that happen, and things that are beyond your strength and your ability. So as a result of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him mightily, he goes and he finds the fresh jawbone of a donkey. Okay, so he reaches out his hand, he takes it, and then as a result, he kills 1,000 guys. So a lot of what is associated with Samson is strength, and that's what we know him for. And the Spirit of God comes and does that. Now, let me just recap a few things here. Where it says came mightily, this is the definitions that the Briggs driver, whatever that Hebrew dictionary is called, uses these words. It says to advance, to prosper, to make progress, to succeed, to be profitable. Okay, so when the Spirit of the Lord came mightily, this is the kind of language that is used there. Now, so just to sort of finish up and talk about the progress of the Spirit, starting with Othniel, you need the descendants of the Spirit of God upon you initially. We can't go right to Samson. We can't be, as it says there in that first couple of lines, advancing and prospering, making progress, succeeding, being profitable, all that kind of stuff. That can't happen until the Spirit of God presences himself with you. So there's this descent. And then there's this idea of then the wrapping, the being clothed, because God wants to lavish himself upon you. God doesn't want to be scarce. He wants to come around you and wrap you like a big warm blanket on a cold day. And then, as with Samson, God starts to agitate, God starts to bubble, God starts to move. And then finally, you push forward and you progress. So I think, those four particular things, because those are the four dimensions that are mentioned about the Spirit of the Lord in this book. That's what we need. That's what we need to see spiritual progress in our lives. We need to pray and say, Lord, we all have the Spirit of God, but Lord, help us to know the presence of God. Sometimes we're eager beavers and we want to, know what the mind of God is, and we want to know what to do. Sometimes I sit with guys. And I ask them, what are you looking in life? What do you want to do or be or whatever? And I say, I need guidance. And I need to know what to do. I was like, well, before you can know what to do and be guided, you need to know the guide. You need to be able to sit and trust God initially, and then, as you're filled with the Spirit of God, then what the Spirit of God then does is he starts to grow the fruit of the Spirit, within you, of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So those things then start to grow and they start to flourish within you. And then as that is there, fruit, when you eat fruit, there's sugar in fruit, and there's energy that is associated with fruit. So when you get that into you, that causes then a metabolism of energy, which then starts to give you motivation. So and then as you have motivation, you then start to push forward and you start to progress. But you're seeking God and saying, Lord, how do I do this? Tell me where to go. Tell me what to do, and all that kind of stuff. And God will guide you through his word. So, yeah. So that's that little study there of the Spirit of the Lord in the book of Judges. So found that interesting. So like I say, we'll look at a bit of Samson next week, and then we'll park it for a month or so after that. So, any hoot.